This then identifies one, and there are quite a number, as you pointed out, of common moral threads within all humanity, which is what we'd expect to find if morals are objective. We would also expect to find that people have some differences about things, just like people have differences about science and math, by the way. Even though math strikes me, and I suspect you, as something that has an independent, objective existence, there are right and wrong questions to math, right and wrong answers to math questions, even though sometimes we get our sums wrong. So I think this is exactly what you'd expect to find if objectives were moral.
Just a word about killing. It wouldn't be surprising if every moral structure had a rule against murder, since murder is wrong killing. So it's circular. What would be more interesting is if every morality had a rule against killing, but they don't. As a matter of fact, in this community, there's no rule against killing cattle. There's no rule, as far as I know, against killing in war. There are lots and lots of limits to the rule on killing. And there's very little commonality of the conditions under which it's morally acceptable to kill across cultures. In many cultures, it's okay to kill a stranger.
All right, this is more of an application question. Based on the position that there are no objective moral truths, how does one society who has a system of moral rules that deems genocide unacceptable respond to another society who may be conducting murder on a massive scale, if at all? It's for John Baker.
I think that's a very difficult question. That question is in the area where people like John Rawls are talking about the overlapping consensus. Rather, one of the tricky questions is as you see, how to work out a story of what's morally appropriate when people from one moral structure interrelate with people from another moral structure. The Romans and the Greeks in the 2nd, 3rd century before the Common Era suggested an account of this. They distinguished between jus civilis, which is the civil law, the law of any community, and jus naturalis, the law that governs the interrelationship between people from different cultures. If that's what your question is, that's an interesting question, and one that I think cannot intelligibly be addressed in the kind of moral realist approach that Greg is taking. I could talk for an hour on this if you wish, but you probably don't want me to.
Well, I actually think the question is right to the point. Either morality is above all cultures, or it is created by cultures or individuals. If it's created by cultures, it seems obvious then, if two cultures disagree, there is no standard by which they can adjudicate their disagreement. One culture believes in genocide, the other culture believes in helping people. How are you able to judge another culture's point of view if in fact it is the culture itself that is the ground for that point of view? They may have their reasons, their reasons may sound really good, but that doesn't mean that their actions are themselves right. If there is no objective standard, there is no way to answer your question. But it seems like it's justified to judge other cultures for some of those things. Therefore, relativism, in the sense that I'm using the word relativism, is false.
The professor made the point that beauty was subjective. I think we could all agree that we don't find female bonobos as attractive as male bonobos do, which would tend to go to this point.
Is that your question?
No, I would be wondering then, because this idea of beauty comes from the mind, would morality not also come from the mind of the perceiver? And if not, where does it come from if it's absolute?
I didn't use the word absolute. First of all, I used the word objective, and I think there's a difference, at least in a common understanding. I don't think that beauty comes from the mind, and therefore I'm not tempted to think for that reason, that morality also comes from the mind. Just like I'm looking around this room and I see a room full of people, I am not the least wise tempted to think that my senses are deceiving me, because I have no reason to think that's the case, and that really I, in my mind, have created all of these people. It seems to me that I'm seeing people, and I trust the deliverances of my senses unless I have good reason to deny them. By the same token, it seems like when I observe your wonderful mountain range, I'm observing something beautiful. I have no reason to think that I've created that in my mind. I don't think I have beauty in my mind in that sense. I don't even know what it means to have beauty in your mind. I'm seeing that something that I think is beautiful. And by the same token, I think that we have faculties that can see reason, rationality, mathematics, physical things, and morality in just the same way. We can perceive the thing when we gaze upon it. And even though there are differences of opinion, we can come to the right conclusion much of the time, and I think that we do. By the way, the fact that people in the past thought that having Blackberry whites was wrong, and was obviously wrong, doesn't tell us anything about morality. Because there was a long time in the world when people said the world was flat, and if you said otherwise, they said, would you just look outside? But we know differently. So just because we're mistaken about moral issues sometimes doesn't mean that there aren't right answers to moral questions. That's my point.
I'd like to make a couple of comments on that. I'm not, and the approach that I describe in no way suggests that you can't assess moral principles, moral rules. Of course you can. The whole point of what I said in my opening remarks was exactly to give an account or an outline of account about how you do assess moral rules. You assess by them by seeing how well they address the human predicament, which I described briefly. So I don't think that morality comes from culture. Of course I don't. Morality comes from trying to think how to address problems in the human predicament, suggestions on how to address those. So you assess moral structures by looking at how well they do at addressing the problems that come from the human predicament.
My question is about law, actually. If you don't believe that there's objective morality, who or what should define a law of a culture?
The law of a culture, I take it by the law you don't mean the moral law, you mean the legal law. Well, what I think, that's a long story, but very, very briefly, amongst those things that probably we should, amongst those rules that probably we should include as moral rules, there are some rules that are so serious in one sense, that is, non-compliance produces devastating consequences, that the cost of making them illegal is worth bearing. If you make something illegal, there's a tremendous cost. The cost is you have to enforce them, you punish people who don't comply, you punish people who are not guilty. And so you have to do a balancing exercise on the moral structures that you have adopted to see which of them are so serious as to warrant the cost of having a legal injunction against them.
See, this is part of the problem here. What does it mean that the actions are so serious that we are justified in taking action against them? The notion of serious itself implies a moral standard that you measure the actions by. The professor said that he's not talking about relativism in the sense that I'm referring to it, but it's rather these things are decided based on the issue of humans flourishing. Who is it that decides what amounts to human flourishing? Who is it that makes that decision, which is, I think, the question. It turns out that it's the group that gets to make those decisions. These things are just not made automatically as if the conclusion followed so clearly from the quest.